There's no getting around it. This is a stupid argument. I always see people bring this up as some major gotcha against the Pokemon Company, trying to imply that Pokemon in any way, shape, or form plagiarized Dragon Quest. And it is worth mentioning right off the bat that the people saying this are not Pokemon fans, they are not Dragon Quest fans, they are not fans of RPGs, and they are certainly not Nintendo fans. So why exactly would you ever take anything these people have to say seriously? I want to preface that going into this video because it is very, very important we understand where this argument is coming from. It's coming from people who are desperately trying to downplay the success and longevity of the Pokemon IP. Now, as someone who is a fan of both Pokemon and Dragon Quest, it is time we lay these allegations to rest. Now, all of this is pretty obvious to anyone who spent, even a trace amount of time, researching Pokemon, researching Dragon Quest, looking into this matter. But the big cope that a lot of people default to is alleging that Pokemon's mechanics were lifted from Dragon Quest, specifically Dragon Quest V. The idea that you would recruit monsters in the field and then use them in your party throughout the entire game. Now, the way Pokemon handles its character recruitment system is completely distinct from Dragon Quest V. In Pokemon, you have to weaken the monster, you have to catch it. There's a capture rate. Different balls do different things. You have the typing system. Dragon Quest V, essentially, you just randomly are given the option to recruit monsters after you defeat them. So the influence is there. It is very much in line, very similar to what Dragon Quest V did and what games like Shin Megami Tensei would do, but Pokemon established its own unique tone and identity, very distinct from both of those games. There is no character fusion. Pokemon have evolutionary stages. You have the typing system. Again, Pokemon went out of its way to establish its own unique identity and setting distinct from Dragon Quest. And that's the major takeaway you get when you look at this demographic. There is no way that anybody would ever confuse anything on the left with anything on the right. This isn't Pow World. It's not like Pokemon just ripped the models and put them into their own game. They have a distinct art style. They have completely unique designs. They have completely original systems and mechanics. Pokemon invented an entirely new brand that was influenced by, not plagiarized from, Dragon Quest. And that is very important when talking about this because Dragon Quest is this hugely influential RPG franchise that has influenced all manner of games from all sorts of genres and is this major cultural thing in Japan. This idea that Pokemon is plagiarized from it is just ludicrous, especially when you have titles like Final Fantasy, which were much more directly linked to Dragon Quest, which were much more similar in style and in general gameplay, and went on and developed its own unique identity outside of that. And I do think it needs to be said, the reason why this has become an issue right now, why you have so many people saying that Pokemon plagiarized Dragon Quest right now, is because of the Power World situation. Fanboys, cultural influencers, YouTubers, gaming analysts, they're all trying their best to damage control for this obvious piece of plagiarism. A blatant example of stealing from someone else and trying to pass it off as your own, right? Power World is just this massive disaster and is a very blatant example of what real plagiarism in the video game industry looks like, where you have mechanics that are lifted wholesale from games like Pokemon Legends Arceus. You have character designs that are plagiarized. You have just all manner of just obvious stealing, theft, copyright infringement. It is, they violated their patents. It's pretty blatantly obvious, and it has been since the game was first unveiled, but the absolute defense force for this game is straight up unhinged. I do think it does need to be addressed more. Just how ridiculous Pal World's plagiarism actually is. I really don't think that even after Nintendo wins the lawsuit, I don't think people are going to accept the fact that Pal World is indeed plagiarism. It's an issue that they're desperately trying to skate around and not wanting to address, but I do find it amusing how the Pal Bros, in their defense of Pal World, trying to insist that their plagiarism is good. They seriously thought that this would fly. Accusing Pokemon of plagiarizing from Dragon Quest. It didn't work. Nobody thinks this. Nobody will ever think this. It's never going to be a thing. But the sheer fact that they tried to do this is just straight up embarrassing and really should be condemned for what it is. To begin with, let us start with examining the comparison in this particular image. This is the go-to image that people have been referring to when trying to allege that Pokemon plagiarized Dragon Quest or that the monsters were influenced by them. And the influence is clearly there, right? The Pokemon team has been very upfront about the fact that they were huge fans of Dragon Quest, that they played the games, that they were influenced by the games, but this is by no means plagiarism. As you can see by examining these creatures, all of them are based off of real-world concepts, animals, mythology, or what have you. Pokemon was able to give its own unique, distinct visual flavor that's different from Akira Toriyama's take on monsters. Pokemon has a very specific, very, very distinct tone to it that's radically different than Dragon Quest's. And that can be seen throughout the way the world is presented, the mechanics, the features, the way the game is handled, right? Pokemon is an RPG, that's true, but it's a very distinct RPG. Dragon Quest established the formula of being a legendary hero, going out into a medieval fantasy setting and defeating the Dark Lord and saving the world. But Pokemon is a lot more grounded. Pokemon is this fantasy of a kid setting out on an adventure, meeting other people like him and catching these monsters to use against other monsters. Pokemon feels as if it put a lot more thought and cohesiveness into how these monsters actually fit into the setting.